I was holding two things in my hand that morning, a mop and a letter. The mop I'd held 1,000 times before. The letter, that was new. It was from the company's health insurance provider. Denial of coverage. Reason: employment classification does not meet eligibility requirements. Below that, in smaller print, patient responsibility, $47,000. I stood there in the executive bathroom I'd just cleaned, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and I remember thinking how appropriate it was. Me, surrounded by other people's shit, holding a piece of paper that said my health didn't matter. I'd worked at Technova for 8 years. 8 years of waking up at 3:30 in the morning. 8 years of taking 2 buses across town in the dark. 8 years of scrubbing toilets that belonged to people who made more in a day than I made in a year. And when I needed them, when I was lying on a hospital bed with a ruptured appendix, scared and alone, they sent me a letter. Not a phone call, not a conversation, a letter, with a corporate logo at the top and my desperation itemized at the bottom. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into my pocket, picked up the mop, and that's when I decided. Not out loud, not dramatically, just a quiet thought that settled in my chest like a stone. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to win. My name is Carmen, and this is the story of how I went from cleaning the bathrooms to owning the boardroom. I came to the United States when I was 22, young, hopeful, and incredibly naive. I had a degree in accounting from back home, a university in Honduras that nobody here had ever heard of. I thought that would matter. I thought education was universal. Turns out it's not. What mattered here was where you went to school, who you knew, and whether or not your English sounded like it came from a textbook or the street. Mine came from both, which meant it never quite fit anywhere. So I did what millions of immigrants do. I worked. Not the jobs I trained for, but the jobs that were available. I cleaned houses. I cooked in restaurant kitchens. I took care of elderly people who couldn't remember my name but needed me to remember their medication schedule. And eventually I got hired by a cleaning company contracted to service Technova, a growing tech startup in Silicon Valley. Technova was one of those companies you read about. Young CEO, venture capital funding, big promises about changing the world. They had an open office layout, free snacks, and a ping-pong table nobody ever used because everyone was too busy pretending to be busy. I started on the night shift, 3:30 in the morning to 11. The building was mine for those hours, or at least it felt that way. I'd arrive before anyone else, unlock the doors with my supervisor's key code, and move through the space like a ghost. Meeting rooms first. I'd wipe down the glass walls, vacuum the floors, straighten the chairs that someone had left askew during a heated discussion about market penetration or user acquisition or whatever buzzword was popular that quarter. Then the kitchen, counters sticky with spilled coffee, sinks full of mugs that grown adults couldn't be bothered to rinse, trash cans overflowing with energy drink, cans and takeout containers. And finally, the bathrooms. Executive floor first because apparently even waste has a hierarchy. Marble counters, automatic faucets, soap that smelled like eucalyptus and privilege. I was invisible. That's not self-pity. That's just fact. People would walk past me in the hallways and not make eye contact. I'd hold the door open and they'd walk through without a word. Once, I was vacuuming outside a conference room and someone inside actually said, "Can someone close the door?" The noise is distracting. I was 3 feet away. They didn't even glance at me. But Here's the thing about being invisible. You see everything. You hear everything. And people say things around you they'd never say if they thought you mattered. I heard contract negotiations. I heard arguments about funding. I heard a VP admit they'd lied to investors about user numbers. I heard the CEO, James Whitmore, tell his COO that they had maybe 6 months of runway left, and if the next product launch failed, they were done. I absorbed it all, not because I had a plan, just because I had nothing else, no social life, no family nearby, just work, a studio apartment in a rough neighborhood, and a stubborn refusal to give up. At night, after my shift, I'd go home and try to study. I wanted to do more, be more. I took free online courses in business management. I watched YouTube videos about finance. I read articles about startup culture and venture capital. Most nights, I'd fall asleep with my laptop still open, too exhausted to keep my eyes focused. But I kept trying. I told myself that one day it would matter, that one day I'd use this knowledge for something. Then I got sick. It started as a stomachache, nothing unusual. I figured it was something I ate, stress, the usual. But it got worse. Sharp, stabbing pain on my right side. Fever. I tried to push through. I couldn't afford to miss work. Couldn't afford to go to the doctor either. No insurance. My supervisor, a man named Ron who managed the cleaning crew, had told me years ago that I wasn't eligible for the company health plan. "You're contracted through us," he'd said, gesturing vaguely at the cleaning company logo on his shirt. Not them. Made sense at the time. I didn't push. But the pain got so bad I couldn't stand up straight. A neighbor found me collapsed in the hallway and called an ambulance. I woke up in a hospital bed, groggy and confused, with a nurse telling me I'd had emergency surgery, appendicitis. Another few hours and it would have been septic. Life-threatening. I should have been grateful. I was alive, but all I could think about was the bill. I didn't have family here to help. My mother was back in Honduras, living on the money I sent her every month. My ex-boyfriend had disappeared 2 years ago, leaving me with nothing but bad credit and trust issues. I was alone, and now I was $47,000 in debt. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days. They discharged me with painkillers, instructions, and a payment plan I couldn't afford. When I got back to my apartment, there was a letter waiting. From Technova's insurance provider. I opened it, thinking maybe, just maybe, there'd been a mistake. Maybe I was covered after all. But no. Denial of coverage. Employment classification does not meet eligibility requirements. I read it 5 times. Then I called Ron. He sounded annoyed that I was bothering him. "Yeah, I told you you're contracted," he said. "You don't work for Technova directly, so you're not on their plan." "But I work there," I said, "every day. For 8 years." He sighed. "Look, Carmen, I don't make the rules. Take it up with corporate if you want, but I'm telling you it's not gonna change anything." I hung up, sat on my couch, stared at the letter, and that's when the anger started. Not the hot, loud kind, the cold, calculated kind. The kind that doesn't scream, it plans. For 8 years, I'd been invisible. For 8 years, I'd cleaned up after people who didn't see me, and now, when I needed them, they made it clear. I didn't matter. Fine. If I didn't matter to them, they were about to matter a whole lot less to me. Because I'd been listening, I'd been learning, and I knew things. Things they didn't think anyone outside their circle knew. I just had to figure out how to use it. That week, I went back to work. Same routine, same invisibility. But now, I was paying attention differently, not passively, actively. I started carrying a small notebook in my pocket. Nothing obvious, just a little spiral one, the kind you'd use for grocery lists. Every time I heard something important, I'd write it down. Meeting room B, investor call, concerns about Q3 revenue, executive bathroom, James on the phone, mentioned delayed product launch, kitchen, overheard two engineers talking about massive bug in the new app. I wasn't stealing documents, I wasn't hacking computers. I was just listening and remembering. Over the next few months, a picture started to form. Technova wasn't the success story it pretended to be. It was struggling, badly. The new product they'd hyped for 2 years was a disaster. Users hated it. Investors were getting nervous. There were whispers about layoffs, about cutting costs, about finding a buyer before the whole thing collapsed. And the more I learned, the more I realized something. This company was vulnerable, really vulnerable. The kind of vulnerable where the right push at the right time could change everything. I started researching public records, SEC filings, shareholder information. Technova wasn't a private company anymore. They'd gone public a year ago, a small IPO to raise cash. That meant there were shareholders, lots of them, some big, some small. I found a list online. Most of the major shares were held by venture capital firms and the founding team. But there were dozens of smaller investors, people who'd bought in early, hoping to get rich, and were now watching their investment tank. I started reaching out, carefully, through email, through LinkedIn, polite messages, professional. I introduced myself as someone interested in learning more about the company, about investment opportunities. Most ignored me. A few responded with confusion. One guy, a retired engineer named Paul, who owned about 2% of the company, actually called me. "Who are you?" he asked. "Someone who knows this company better than you think," I said. He laughed. "You some kind of analyst?" "No," I said. "I clean the bathrooms." There was a pause. Then he laughed again, but differently this time. "All right," he said. "You've got my attention." I met Paul at a diner in San Jose. He showed up in a polo shirt and khakis, looking every bit the comfortable retiree. I showed up in my work uniform because I didn't have time to change. He ordered coffee. I ordered water. "So," he said, leaning back, "you really work there? Cleaning crew?" "Yeah, for 8 years. And you want to talk to me about my shares?" I nodded. He studied me for a long moment. "Why?" "Because your investment is dying," I said. "And I don't think you know how bad it is." He frowned. "I know the stock's down. Everyone knows that." "Do you know they're bleeding cash?" I asked. "Do you know the last product launch was a failure? Do you know they're 6 months away from having to sell or shut down?" His frown deepened. "How do you know that?" I pulled out my notebook, flipped through pages. I told him dates, numbers, conversations I'd overheard, details that weren't public. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he set his coffee down carefully. "If this is true," he said slowly, "I'm screwed." "We all are." "Not necessarily," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "I want to buy your shares." He laughed. "Outright?" "You? Yeah. You're a janitor. I'm an investor, and I have a plan." He stopped laughing. I told him everything, how I'd been studying the company, how I knew its weaknesses, how I believed that with the right pressure, the right moves, Technova could be forced to change or sell. Either way, there was value there. It just needed someone willing to fight for it. "And why would you do that?" he asked. "Because they denied me health insurance after I almost died," I said quietly. "And I'm done being invisible." He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "How much are you offering?" I told him. 15 cents on the dollar, more than he'd get if the company collapsed. Less than the shares were theoretically worth. He should have said no, should have laughed me out of the diner. Instead, he said, "I'll think about it." 2 weeks later, he sold me his shares. I borrowed money from everywhere: savings, credit cards, a loan from a guy in my neighborhood who charged interest that should have been illegal. I scraped together $15,000. It nearly killed me financially, but I did it. And with Paul's 2%, plus shares from 2 other small investors who also sold to me, I now owned 12% of Technova. 12%. Enough to have a voice. Enough to demand a seat at the table. When the company was notified of the share transfer, I imagine there was confusion, then concern, then someone probably said, "Who the hell is Carmen Rodriguez?" They were about to find out. The first call came from the CFO, a woman named Diane, polished and professional and deeply confused. "Ms. Rodriguez," she said, her tone friendly but cautious. "I wanted to reach out regarding your recent share acquisition." I was quiet. She continued, "We're a bit surprised. Investor Relations wasn't aware of any interest from your side." "That's because I didn't go through Investor Relations," I said. "Right," she said, drawing the word out. "May I ask what your intentions are?" "To attend the next shareholders' meeting." There was a pause. "Of course," she said. "You have that right. Good. I look forward to it." Another pause. "Ms. Rodriguez," she said carefully, "I'm not sure you understand the complexity of these meetings. They're very technical, a lot of financial jargon." "I understand," I said. "That's why I've been studying your SEC filings for the past 3 months." I heard her inhale. "I also understand," I continued, "that your Q3 revenue is down 18% from projections, that your user retention is at an all-time low, and that your burn rate suggests you have less than 7 months of operating capital. Would you like me to continue?" Silence. "I'll see you at the meeting," I said, and I hung up. If you're still watching, leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever felt invisible at work? Just type invisible so I know you're here. And if you want to see how this story ends, subscribe and hit the bell, because what happens next is going to shock you. Trust me. The shareholders' meeting was held in a sleek conference room on the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a long table that probably cost more than my car. About 20 people in the room, suits, ties, leather folders. I walked in wearing my best outfit, which was a borrowed blazer and pants I'd bought at a thrift store. Every head turned, not because I looked impressive, because I looked wrong. I didn't belong there, and everyone knew it. James Whitmore sat at the head of the table, tall, graying at the temples in that distinguished way. He looked at me like I was a stain on his expensive carpet. "You must be Ms. Rodriguez," he said. His tone was pleasant. His eyes were not. "I am. Please." He gestured to an empty chair at the far end of the table, the furthest seat from him, of course. I sat, opened my notebook. The meeting started. They went through the agenda, financial reports, product updates, future projections. Everything sounded polished, professional, optimistic. Then they opened the floor for questions. I raised my hand. James looked at me like I'd just belched during a wedding. "Yes, Ms. Rodriguez? Your Q3 revenue report states growth of 4%, I said. "But that's not accurate, is it?" "Excuse me. According to user data that was discussed in an internal meeting 3 weeks ago, your active user base declined by 22%. That means your revenue per user had to increase significantly to show even 4% growth, which suggests you raised prices, which will drive more users away. The room went silent. Diane, the CFO, cleared her throat. "I'm not sure where you're getting your information," she said carefully, "but I assure you our reports are accurate." "I'm getting my information from your office," I said, "because I work there. I've worked there for 8 years. And I hear everything." James's jaw tightened. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said slowly, "I don't know what you think you're doing, but making baseless accusations in a shareholders' meeting is not appropriate." "They're not baseless," I said. "I have dates, names, numbers. Would you like me to share them?" Another investor, an older man in a gray suit, leaned forward. "Actually," he said, "I'd like to hear them." "So would I," said another. James's face went red. "This is absurd," he said. "We're not going to sit here and be interrogated by someone who, with all due respect, has no idea how this industry works." "With all due respect," I said, standing up, "I know this company better than you do, because while you're in your office pretending everything is fine, I'm in the hallways hearing the truth." I pulled out my notebook, flipped to a page. September 14th, Meeting Room C. "You told your VP of Engineering that the app redesign was a failure, but to keep pushing it because you'd already spent too much money to pivot." October 6th, Executive Bathroom. "You were on the phone with a board member begging for another cash infusion because payroll was coming up short." October 20th, your office. "You told Diane that if you didn't find a buyer or a miracle in 6 months, you'd have to shut down." The room erupted. Investors started talking over each other. James was shouting. Diane looked like she wanted to disappear. I just stood there, calm, waiting. Finally, James slammed his hand on the table. "Enough!" Everyone went quiet. He pointed at me. "You're done. Security will escort you out." "Actually," I said, "I'm a shareholder. You can't remove me from this meeting without violating corporate bylaws." He stared at me. I stared back. One of the investors, a woman in her 50s, spoke up. "She's right, James. And frankly, I want answers." "Me too," said another. James looked around the table, realized he'd lost control. He sat down heavily. "Fine," he said. "Let's talk." The fallout was immediate. By the end of the week, 3 major investors had called for an independent audit. By the end of the month, Technova's stock had dropped another 15%, and I became a story. A local journalist reached out after hearing whispers about the meeting. She wanted to know who I was, where I came from, why I was fighting. I told her everything, not for revenge, not for fame, but because I wanted people to know. To see what happened when companies treated workers like they didn't exist. The article came out with the headline, "Janitor Takes on Tech Giant After Being Denied Healthcare." It went viral. Suddenly, I was getting calls, emails, messages from people I'd never met, telling me their own stories of being invisible, being exploited, being cast aside. Workers' rights organizations reached out, union reps, lawyers offering pro bono help, and inside Technova, everything changed. Other contracted workers, people like me, drivers, cooks, security guards, they started organizing, started asking questions, started demanding better. James tried to fight back. He hired a PR firm, gave interviews saying I was disgruntled, misinformed, trying to damage the company for personal gain. But the narrative had shifted. People weren't listening to him anymore. They were listening to me. Then, something I didn't expect happened. A large investment fund, one that specialized in turnarounds, reached out. They'd been watching the chaos, and instead of running away, they saw opportunity. They made an offer to buy a controlling stake in Technova, but there was a condition. They wanted me involved, not as a janitor, as a consultant, someone who understood the culture, the problems, the people. James fought it. Of course he did. But the board overruled him. Within 3 months, the deal was done. James was out, and I was in. All right, I need to pause here for a second. If you're still with me, thank you. I know this is a lot, but here's where it gets really good. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because what comes next, the transformation, the revenge, the redemption, it's everything you're hoping for. And then some. I didn't become CEO. Let's be clear about that. I didn't have the experience, didn't have the technical knowledge. What I had was something else. I understood the people, the ones who made the company run but never got credit. The investment fund brought in a new CEO, a woman named Rebecca Ortiz, who turned around 2 failing companies before. She was smart, direct, and the first thing she did was call me into her office. "Sit," she said. I sat. "You've caused quite a stir," she said. I shrugged. "I just told the truth." She smiled. "That's exactly why I want you here. I'm making you Chief Operating Officer." I blinked. "What? You heard me." "Co. You'll oversee operations and human resources. You'll make sure this company actually takes care of its people." I stared at her. "I don't have an MBA." "I don't care," she said. "You have something better. You have perspective. And you have the trust of the workers. That's worth more than any degree. So yes or no?" I didn't hesitate. Yes. My first day as COO felt surreal. I walked into the same building I'd cleaned for 8 years. But this time, I didn't go through the service entrance. I walked through the front doors, took the elevator to the top floor, sat in an office with my name on the door. It didn't feel real, but it was. And I had work to do. My first action was simple. I ended all third-party cleaning contracts, every janitor, every driver, every cook. They were all offered direct employment with Technova. Full benefits, health insurance, paid time off, retirement plans. Some people cried when they got the offer letters. I almost did too. Next, I launched an education program. Any employee without a college degree could take courses paid for by the company to improve their skills, learn new things, build a future. Then I implemented salary transparency. Everyone's pay was now visible internally. No more secrets, no more games. If someone was being underpaid, it was now obvious. Of course, not everyone was happy. Some of the old executive team quit, said I was ruining the culture. I told them the culture needed ruining. Others stayed, adapted, realized that treating people well actually made the company better. Productivity went up, turnover went down, and slowly, painfully, Technova started to recover. It wasn't smooth. There were lawsuits. James tried to sue me personally for defamation. It went nowhere. There were protests from investors who didn't like the changes. Some sold their shares, others stayed, believed in the vision. And then, 2 years after I became COO, something incredible happened. We got an acquisition offer. A major multinational tech company wanted to buy Technova. Not because we were failing, because we were succeeding, because we'd become known as a company that valued people, that did things differently, and that reputation was worth something. The offer was generous, more than anyone expected. When the deal closed, my 12% stake was worth $3.2 million. I paid off every debt, every loan, every hospital bill. I bought a small house in a neighborhood where I didn't have to worry about break-ins. And I started a new project, a consulting firm. We help immigrants navigate corporate America, teach them what I learned the hard way, how to be seen, how to fight, how to win. I hire people who've been invisible, give them a platform, a voice, a chance. Some mornings I still wake up at 5, not because I have to, just because my body remembers. I make coffee, sit by the window, and I think about how far I've come, from cleaning bathrooms to owning boardrooms, from invisible to unavoidable. People ask me if it was worth it, the risk, the fear, the nights I couldn't sleep because I didn't know if I'd lose everything. And I always say the same thing. Yes, not because of the money, not because of the title, but because I proved something to myself, to everyone who ignored me. That being at the bottom doesn't mean staying there. That invisibility is a choice other people make, not a reality you have to accept. And that sometimes the person scrubbing the floors knows more about the foundation than the person sitting at the top. I still visit Technova sometimes, walk through the building, see the people who work there now treated with dignity, with respect. And I think about the letter I got all those years ago, denial of coverage. I framed it, hung it in my office, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that the system that tried to break me is the same system I changed. One bathroom, one shareholder meeting, one fight at a time. So let me ask you, have you ever been told you don't matter, that you're not important enough, that your voice doesn't count? I have. And I didn't accept it. What about you? Tell me in the comments. Tell me your story. And if this inspired you, if it made you think, if it made you believe that change is possible, subscribe to this channel because I have more stories, more battles, more proof that the underdog can win. Thanks for watching. And remember, no one is invisible unless you let them be.